there's more SpongeBob Biography.
I was holding up this great big juicy worm.
Opie, we're having our breakfast now.
And can I tell you about the bugs?
No!
A freckle-faced Opie in The Andy Griffith Show. A 1950s Richie Cunningham on Happy Days. An award-winning director of some of Hollywood's best-loved movies. The multi-talented Ron Howard is a devoted family man and confident performer who changed the course of his life to become one of Hollywood's top filmmakers. From his birth on March 1st, 1954, Ronald William Howard seemed destined for a life in entertainment. His parents, newlyweds Rance and Jean Howard, had dreams of starting a family and making their mark in the theater. Soon after they welcomed their new son, they headed for New York, the center of theatrical opportunity. Within months, Rance landed a role with veteran actor Henry Fonda in the touring company of Mr. Roberts, and Jean appeared off-Broadway in The Passion Play. But in 1955, Rance's career took an unexpected turn when he was cast in a movie, a Western called Frontier Woman. Jean was also hired on the picture, and one-year-old Ronnie Howard made his feature film debut as a babe in his mother's arms.
We were so pleased to have him, so pleased to have him. But he was, you know, he didn't live in one world and we lived in the other. He lived in our world with us.
The child frequently accompanied his parents to auditions, and when Rance was cast in The Journey, the director, Anatole Litvak, was so charmed by 3-year-old Ronnie that he created a whole new character just for him.
We were skeptical, but we thought, well, okay, he has an opportunity to do this movie, The Journey, we'll do it, and if it has any negative aspects, we won't do it anymore.
The experience was anything but negative. The film was shot on location in Vienna, Austria. The Howards were not only working together, they were seeing the world together. By the end of the decade, the television industry was booming, and stage actors flocked to the West Coast to get a break on the small screen. Jean and Rance followed the trend and moved to a small suburb outside of Hollywood, California called Burbank. When Jean gave birth to a second son, Clint, she decided to stay home and become a full-time mom, while Rance slowly began to find work in television. But with popular shows like Leave It to Beaver and Dennis the Menace dominating the airwaves, a whole new area of the industry had opened up for child actors. Believing that their red-headed, freckle-faced son had potential, the Howards decided to find 5-year-old Ronnie an agent. In no time, the boy's career took off as he began appearing on television programs such as Johnny Ringo, starring Don Durant.
Now, Ricky, I'm going to ask you a very important question now, boy. Who killed your mother?
That man.
But it was an episode of GE Theater called Barnaby and Mrs. O'Malley, starring Bert Lahr, that changed Ronnie's life forever. The morning after the show aired, his agent was bombarded with phone calls, including an offer for a new television series called The Andy Griffith Show. Based on the life of a sheriff in a small town, the show starred Andy Griffith as Sheriff Andy Taylor, Don Knotts as Deputy Barney Fife, Frances Bavier as Aunt Bee, and Ronnie Howard as Andy's son, Opie. But when rehearsals began in the spring of 1960, the 6-year-old hit a stumbling block. He couldn't read. Fortunately, his father, Rance, was on the set every day, and it was a problem they quickly overcame.
I would go to the script readings. I would read Opie's lines, and Ronnie would sit and listen, you know. I would teach him his lines.
You ought to see him eat, Paul. Remember when they wouldn't take any food from me at all?
I sure do.
Well, you should have seen them this morning. They were grabbing for these great big juicy worms.
Opie, we're having our breakfast now.
But you should have seen him, Aunt Bee. I was holding up this great big juicy worm.
Opie!
Opie, I believe Aunt Bee's trying to tell you that worms ain't exactly a good subject for the breakfast table.
Oh. Then can I tell you about the bugs?
No!
Ronnie displayed not only a seriousness and dedication to the work, but a raw, natural talent.
Fly away. Please fly away.
He had to cry in a scene. And he was just, about 6, I guess, years old. And he cried. And he was still crying after the scene was over. And Bob Sweeney was the director. He went over and he said, how did you arrive at that? He said, well, I had a little dog that died. And he thought of that, and that brought it on. That's method acting.
Yeah.
The Andy Griffith Show quickly rose to the #1 spot on television, and Ronnie Howard became a household name. But his newfound celebrity was not a license to misbehave.
He was very quiet and well-behaved. He's the best behaved child actor I ever worked with, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. He, and his parents told us right off the reel not to spoil him by giving him a lot of presents and stuff like that. So we honored what they said.
While on hiatus in 1961, Ronnie went to work on the big screen in Door-to-Door Maniac, starring Johnny Cash, and The Music Man, opposite Shirley Jones and Robert Preston. The Music Man was a critical and box office success, and the press raved about the 8-year-old's performance. By 1962, 3-year-old Clint was making guest appearances on The Andy Griffith Show as Leon, the silent cowboy, and learning the same invaluable lessons his older brother had already mastered.
Dad really was our mentor. He made sure that Ron and I were prepared every day. Dad always stressed, your #1 job is to go to work being prepared.
But now, with both boys working, the Howards grew concerned that they were robbing their sons of normal, carefree childhoods.
Dad would ask us every time, do you want to do this? Ron and I always had a choice whether we could do a job or not do a job.
Given the option, Ronnie chose working, but he had to maintain his grades in a full curriculum of classes tutored by a studio teacher. Luckily, his curiosity in the classroom was easily matched by his curiosity on the set. Crew members patiently answered his copious questions, and it was no surprise to them when the 8-year-old actor announced that what he really wanted to do was direct. For his next birthday, Andy Griffith gave the young star a Super 8mm camera, and soon Ronnie was making movies about anything and everything, including his weekly household responsibilities.
He did have one chore, and that was to mow the grass. He really hated to cut it. And one day he came in and he says, Dad, he says, I've got a wonderful idea. I want to do a movie. And Rance said, oh, you do? He said, yes. He said, you put on those fatigues of yours, and you will be like a colonel in the Army, and you're pushing that lawnmower, and you're attacking that grass. Amazingly, it took just as long to make the movie as it did to cut the grass.
By 1964, the famous 10-year-old was earning more than $100,000 a year. But despite their children's growing wealth, the Howards raised the boys in a modest middle-class lifestyle.
Rance has always supported our family, and we've lived on the money that he's made, and everything else went into the bank. And Rance just wanted the money there for them when they got ready to go to college.
But college was still far from 11-year-old Ronnie's thoughts. A diehard sports fan, he often told journalists his first love was baseball. Recognizing that their young star still needed to have a childhood, the producers of The Andy Griffith Show reworked the entire cast and crew's production schedule so that Ronnie wouldn't miss a single Little League game. By 1967, America watched, in living color, as the little boy matured into a wholesome teen.
Say, you know, I was just thinking, we don't have any homework or anything. I'd like to drop by the record store and pick up a few discs. Okay, great.
By now, Ronnie was not the only star in the family. Each week, thousands of fans tuned into the popular series Gentle Ben, starring Clint Howard.
I do remember there was a year when the Griffith Show was #1 and Gentle Ben was #2. And yeah, you know, that made us feel pretty good. And I was 8 and he was 13. And yeah, the Howard boys kicking some booty.
But in 1968, after 8 successful seasons, the Andy Griffith Show shot its final episode. It was a very emotional time for Ronnie, who was unprepared to leave the people who'd become his friends and family. For the first time in his life, Ronnie Howard was out of work. As the TV star sidestepped the unemployment line, he nervously headed for the lunch lines at Burbank's Burroughs High School, a famous face determined to fit into the crowd. In 1968, Ronnie Howard directed his first Western, Cards, Cads, Guns, Gore, and Death, starring his brother Clint. But there was little call for 14-year-old directors, and the shy student turned his attention toward fitting into his new world, public high school.
He decided that he was going to take the year off from acting and really concentrate on basketball. He was up early in the morning shooting baskets and late at night shooting baskets. But at the end of that basketball season, he came to me and he said, I'm not going to get the height. And he said, I don't have the speed. And he says, I think I better go back into show business.
But the gangly teenager had difficulty jumping back into work. It was his first professional dry spell. Nevertheless, Howard refused to give up. After school, he went from audition to audition and slowly began landing television appearances. But in 1970, during his junior year, there was something else that sparked the 16-year-old's interest. Her name was Cheryl Alley, and the teenagers quickly became an exclusive item.
There was a time where Ron was trying to get in 2 dates a week. Rance brought it up one time and said, no, Ron liked to run a lot in those days, where he'd sort of leave the house and say, well, I'm going to go jogging. And he'd run over to the house and come see me.
Ronnie was completely captivated by Cheryl, and the only thing that vied for his attention was his interest in making movies. When he heard about Kodak's National Student Film Contest, the aspiring director wrote another Western and cast his movie with an already popular young star.
I wanted a piece of the action. I was a professional actor. I didn't want to work for nothing. And Ron says, well, how much do you want? And I said, well, I want 50% of the gross.
Once the brothers agreed on the terms, the filming was ready to commence. Starring Clint, Rance, and Ronnie's new girlfriend, Cheryl, the movie about a boy who wanders onto a studio back lot and fantasizes about the Old West was titled Deed of Daring Do. To his surprise, he won second place and a check for $100.
Wins second place nationally in the Kodak Film Festival, and Ron Howard earns $100, making his star $50 richer. And he was angry when he actually had to pay me, because I don't believe he really thought that I'd hold him to the 50% contract. And the dough comes in, and I say, hey, great, the money's here. I'll take mine. And Ron didn't want to give it to me, and I think Dad had to step in and said, a deal's a deal. You know? And Ron had to peel me off $50.
Ronnie was hooked. At only 16, he was an award-winning director. When Howard graduated from high school in 1972, he was accepted into the prestigious film program at the University of Southern California. But the summer before his freshman year, Ronnie leapt at the chance to be directed by one of the most talked about new filmmakers on the scene, 28-year-old George Lucas, in a film called American Graffiti.
We're very much alike. We became fast friends. He was the one actor who was actually the right age for the part. He was obviously the most experienced of all the actors, and he really knew what was going on. And this was his first picture as an adult.
Ronnie was the only famous actor in the cast of Struggling Unknowns that included Richard Dreyfuss and Harrison Ford. The film captured one night in the lives of 4 recent high school graduates as they grappled with decisions that would affect the rest of their lives.
I don't think I'm going to be going tomorrow.
Come on, what are you talking about?
Well, I was thinking I could wait a year, you know, go to city.
After all we went through to get accepted, we're finally getting out of this turkey town, and now you want to crawl back into your cell, right?
Ronnie was riveted by Lucas's dynamic approach to filmmaking, and he shadowed the director through all 28 nights of shooting.
He was very enthusiastic about directing when he was on American Graffiti. We would sit down between takes and talk about directing, and we had fun, you know, and I work in a very different way because I'm a San Francisco filmmaker as opposed to a Hollywood filmmaker, and so he wasn't used to working the way I had worked, which is in a very documentary style, putting the cameras off, letting the actors do a lot of what they wanted to do. I think it was a very different experience from what he had working, especially in television.
When American Graffiti was released in August 1973, it touched a nostalgic chord in the American consciousness, and audiences packed the theaters. Now calling himself a more mature-sounding Ron, he entered USC enthusiastic about his future as a filmmaker. But when director Gary Marshall offered him a starring role in a new television series, the young man couldn't refuse the opportunity. Happy Days debuted in 1974 and centered around the life of a 1950s high school student, Richie Cunningham. Also included in the cast were Tom Bosley, Marion Ross, and Henry Winkler.
He was the star of the show. I played the local hoodlum, you know, the biker. And I had 6 lines. I was a fringe character. I worked maybe once a week in the beginning. And we had an instant communication.
Happy Days was a hit, and for the second time in his life, 20-year-old Ron Howard was a star in the most popular show on television.
No one had written a screenplay. The director?
1975, Gerald Ford was president. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was the #1 film at the box office, and every week, 17 million homes tuned in to Happy Days. The cast were now teenage idols, and Ron Howard was swept into a frenzy of adulation. But even with all the attention, Ron was unwavering in his love for his high school sweetheart Cheryl, and in the spring he proposed marriage. 2 months later, on June 7, 1975, the 21-year-olds were wed.
We invited 306 people in a church that I think only fit 200. We had people standing in the back. Everybody clapped at the end, and we had never heard anybody clap at the end of a wedding, and we loved that.
By now, Ron had left USC convinced he could learn more on the set than in the classroom, and he was making a graceful transition from young actor to natural-born leader.
We're doing Happy Days, reading the scripts, and I didn't like some of the jokes. So I start yelling and I start pounding the script. I said, "Who can do this? You can't do this. What is this?" Ron put his arm around my shoulder, walked me to the back of the soundstage and said, "Henry, maybe we shouldn't do this." I said, "What?" He said, "You know, yell, punch the script. You know, they're working really hard." I went, "Yeah, they really are." And so I never punched the script again for the next 11 years.
In 1976, car chases and demolition derby flicks were the hot ticket at drive-ins across the country. Movies like Cannonball and Death Race 2000 were big hits for producer Roger Corman. When Corman asked Howard to star in one of his films called Eat My Dust, Ron couldn't pass up the chance to work with the man who had launched the careers of many young directors, including Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese.
His questioning as to the way in which the film was going to be made and the various production techniques were much more intricate and much more knowledgeable than I think any actor I'd ever met.
Eat My Dust, a car-chasing, metal-grinding action film, was a smash hit. Only 3 days after it opened, Corman called Ron to suggest a sequel. But the 22-year-old actor was prepared for the call, and he nervously made his first foray into the tough world of Hollywood negotiations.
He said, "I will do the sequel for exactly the same deal as eat my dust, and I'll do one additional job for nothing. And I said, what's that? He said, I'll direct. And I said, you always look like a director to me, Ron.
Ron was keenly aware that his future was riding on the film's success and set out to master the tricks of filming action sequences. He also hired his father to co-write the script and recruited friends and family as cast and crew. Even his wife Cheryl pitched in, volunteering to cook for the 85-member company.
I'm Ron Howard. This is Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto is a love story. With cars.
And I love him, and that's why we're going to Las Vegas to get married.
Also, it's a comedy. With car crashes. Look out, Vegas. We're coming in.
Grand Theft Auto, directed by and starring Ron Howard.
Well, hell.
Ron's directorial debut was a monster success. That fall, he returned to Happy Days for a 6th season and began negotiating with ABC executives to get a shot in the director's chair. But the network could not see beyond his boyish image, and Ron grew frustrated as narrow-minded execs dragged their feet.
He wanted to direct very badly. He had already directed professionally by that time. And Ron's always been, I mean, he's always been a big risk taker. So he decided it was really time for him to go and direct.
In 1979, after 6.5 years on Happy Days, Ron's contract expired and he chose not to renew. The network was shocked and fans were heartbroken to lose one of their favorite television stars. But for Ron Howard, the end of Happy Days would be the beginning of a full-time career in a job he had trained for all his life.
Energy. CoQ10 is essential.
At the age of 26, Ron Howard was determined to become a full-time director. But the phone was not ringing off the hook with offers.
That was a difficult period. You know, his thought was that if he ever, if everything went black in the business, then he would become a teacher.
But Ron wasn't ready for Plan B just yet. He began pitching ideas to anyone who'd listen. And by the following year, Howard's career started to gain some momentum. He directed screen legend Bette Davis in a television movie called Skyward, and he began collaborating with a young, ambitious producer, Brian Grazer.
I had this idea called Night Shift that I thought he would never like, only because it was really racy and involved, guys becoming pimps and running a whorehouse out of a morgue. But he loved it.
Howard jumped at the opportunity to make the film. It was just the subject matter he needed to break from his squeaky clean image. He immediately hired his friend Henry Winkler and 2 unknowns, Michael Keaton and Shelley Long.
The first time that he directed a major motion picture was Night Shift. Now, he was worried. Would this cast and would the crew actually pay attention to him? So we're making the movie, and he just said, hold it for a minute. I just want to think this out. And it was like one of those commercials where everybody just stopped for a minute to wait for Ron to speak, because he was a natural leader.
Audiences loved the movie that made Michael Keaton a star and Ron Howard a commercial director. Ron's home life also took a huge leap forward that year when a baby daughter, Bryce, was born on March 2nd, 1982. The new father now had the challenge of balancing a family with his growing career, but in many ways, after 25 years in entertainment, it was a challenge he'd faced and overcome all his life. The following year, Howard and Grazer went into production on Splash, a fairy tale romantic comedy about a man and a mermaid. Ron, who'd proven he had an eye for young talent, began his search for the ideal cast.
When we were casting Splash, I was a huge Bosom Buddies fan at the time, and I was telling him that he had to see Tom Hanks.
I went in and read for Ron, and he put me through about a 20-minute audition process. I don't know how it happened, but 24 hours later he called me up and told me I had the part, and literally my life was changed forever.
Splash starred television actor Tom Hanks opposite Daryl Hannah and John Candy. Ron was concerned about directing a big-budget feature that involved demanding underwater sequences. True to form, he dove right in and faced the challenge.
He was no pretender to the throne. He wasn't doing it to see if he could do it. Ron had already directed so many things and always been thinking about everything so much as a director that I felt as though I was already in the hands of a guy who was an accomplished filmmaker.
I love you, Madison. Go! Come on, you Madison!
Though the underwater scenes were visually compelling, it was the heartwarming romance between Hanks and Hannah that captivated audiences. Splash opened on March 9, 1984, and was a runaway box office success. At age 30, Ron Howard had joined the ranks of Hollywood's most sought-after young directors. He was on a roll, and there was no turning back.
Yeah, and you know, as he's going like on about the fourth of push, you can just kind of start to back
In 1985, Ron Howard was handpicked by 20th Century Fox to direct Cocoon,
Action!
a film about a group of senior citizens who stumble on a fountain of youth created by extraterrestrials.
Cut! Excellent. Okay, print that.
Cocoon starred veteran actors Jessica Tandy, Hume Cronin, and Don Amici. And although the special effects were central to the plot, Ron strove not to let them overshadow his storytelling.
Coming with us, Bernie.
No. I came to say goodbye. I just wanted to tell you I hope you find what you're looking for.
Rose is gone, Bernie. Why stay?
This is my home. This is where I belong.
It was kind of a tough transition going from child actor to adult director. But I looked up and I saw him up here setting all these shots on this Chapman crane and so confident and so sure of himself and knowing exactly how to do it. And I said to myself, the kid is a director. By God, he's made it. And I felt so good. And even telling you this story, the hair stands up on the back of my neck.
In August 1986, Ron and Brian Grazer solidified their partnership and formed Imagine Films Entertainment, Inc. To raise operating funds, the new company went public on the New York Stock Exchange, where thousands of eager investors bought shares in a man they had trusted for years, Ron Howard.
He's uniquely intelligent and he's tough. He's not an easygoing guy. He's calm, but he's not easygoing. He is very competitive. But it makes for a very good partner to have someone that has the embodiment of all of those strengths.
Though his next film, Willow, was not warmly received, Ron had much more on his mind than the ups and downs of his career. 2 years earlier, Cheryl had given birth to twins, Jocelyn and Paige, and on April 12, 1987, the family welcomed a son, Reed.
Reed, go see Dad.
Not yet, Bryce.
Wait, Daddy.
For his next project, the father of four decided to tell a story about a topic very close to his heart. Simply titled Parenthood, the film was a playful portrait of American family life and featured an all-star cast, including Steve Martin and Mary Steenburgen.
Hey, what do you say later when the kids are asleep? I wear this outfit.
She's in our bed.
Hi, Daddy.
What's the matter, honey? You don't feel so good? You feel like you want to throw up?
Okay.
Gil, oh my God, oh Taylor, baby, oh sweetie, oh. Gil, why are you just standing there? Oh, sweetie.
Waiting for her head to spin around.
You'll be all right. You'll be okay.
Parenthood was great because it represented so much of us. That was really an American family, and it was seen through the eyes of Ron Howard.
But by 1989, Ron had been working non-stop for several years and feared his home life was suffering. Howard announced he would direct only one film every 12 to 18 months in order to spend more time with his wife and children.
In certain ways, my dad is more involved with my day-to-day life than my mom, because he's so conscious of the fact that he has to work and that he has to go off and film movies. So when he is home, he'll be at my school talking to my guidance counselors, and he's a little gullible when it comes to his three girls. You know, we're always sort of giving him a run for his money.
Inspired by his parents' 50-year love affair, Ron brought the same devotion to his own marriage.
I think they are soulmates, because it's remarkable that they met each other, and it was just that they just completely clicked. I think they have a good partnership. Like they go out 3 nights a week to go and see movies together. It's like they're not supposed to do that. They've been married for over 20 years.
After the success of the 1991 drama Backdraft, Ron took his family to Ireland to shoot Far and Away, starring Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman.
It was an ambitious film, Far and Away. You know, we shot it in '70. Beautiful film to look at on a big screen. We always think back of what a great experience that was. Even though we were shooting 6 days a week, we were in Montana working long, hard hours, but it was a blast.
Have a look at this. Land, it says.
Land?
They've got so much of it, they give it away for free.
No land is given away in any part of the world.
In America it is. And I'm going there.
I was very young at that stage and new to American films. And so I was very shy, and he would draw me out, which was lovely. And he gave me a lot of confidence.
The film was loosely based on the tales Ron had heard from his father about his own great-grandfather's participation in the 1893 Oklahoma land rush. Ron felt a deep commitment to telling the story.
And it was amazing to see him directing these huge sequences at the end of the film with hundreds of horses and carriages and just on his game.
We were working over the summer and all the kids were around, and when you get to know people like that and spend that kind of time together, you get really close, and you know, I love them. I think I really love them.
They've managed to raise 4 really, really good kids, which is very hard to do in this industry. As a mother who's raising 2 kids now, my hat is off to them. And I remember one thing they said to us is, we're a family and we're always going to travel together. They're the perfect role models for that.
But Ron was disappointed when Far and Away failed to find an audience. To make matters worse, he and his partner Brian Grazer were having serious reservations about staying with their publicly held company. The filmmakers announced that unless they could buy out the remaining stockholders, they would leave Imagine Entertainment. Furious shareholders felt their investments were under siege and filed a class action lawsuit charging Howard and Grazer with fraud and coercion. But after a frustrating year-long battle, the stockholders were forced to admit that the company had little or no value without Howard and Grazer. They begrudgingly sold their shares to the creative partners. At the age of 39, Ron Howard was finally able to helm his own independent film company. For the first time in his career, he held all the decision-making power. In 1994, Ron Howard and Brian Grazer came across Commander Jim Lovell's book about his true-life experience on the voyage of Apollo 13, a near-catastrophic space mission that, in 1970, threw America into a state of panic. Although the outcome was already a well-known fact, Ron couldn't wait to put the story on film. He hired an all-star cast that included Kevin Bacon, Bill Paxton, Gary Sinise, and Tom Hanks.
There were so many things that were going to be hard to communicate to the audience, but there were philosophical leaps of faith that Ron made that I thought were very, very impressive.
Ron sent the actors to NASA Space Camp in Texas, where they trained with experienced astronauts. After much lobbying, he even secured access to the KC-135 jet, better known as the Vomit Comet, an aircraft that simulates weightlessness at zero gravity. Bill Paxton took his home movie camera to document the event.
Gary, hey buddy, you're in space, man.
As you get a little better at it, just start practicing moving around and just think in terms of trying to get from one specific place to the other.
When the chance to shoot on the zero-gravity aircraft came along, Ron jumped on that thing so fast and so aggressively in order to make it happen that it was almost like guerrilla filmmaking, you know? It was like guys with handheld cameras. We jammed it all in there and we did it.
Rolling, and action.
5, 4. Oh, let's just go. 2, 1. She's burning. Oh, yeah. Okay, here we go. Get the regulators on. Our kids just go 10% thrust. Bring it down, brother. Get the nose down. Okay, I got it. A little more. Come on, baby. That's it. Hold it. Hold it. Damn it. 6, 7, back. That's it. Hold. 8, steady. 9. Shut down.
Houston, we have shutdown.
Apollo 13 was an unprecedented popular and critical success for Ron. In 1996, his peers in the Directors Guild of America honored him with their highest accolade, the Best Director Award. But although Apollo 13 was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Howard himself was excluded from the Best Director category.
It was the worst bummer that he didn't get nominated for an Oscar. And he's told his kids and his wife that he was really, you know, that it hurt and it was disappointing. And I said, well, why'd you do that? And he said, because I want them to know that not everything I do works and that not everything is easy and that there are disappointments and that I face them even if I don't look like I'm facing them. And I thought that was really poignant.
Ron and Brian were on a roll. Their next film, Ransom, was a remake of the 1956 thriller. It starred Mel Gibson and Rene Russo, and became one of the biggest moneymakers of 1996. But it was in 1998 that Ron's status as a pop culture icon reached new heights when he was immortalized on the hit TV series The Simpsons.
Yeah, I'm looking for Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger.
Oh, hey, Ron, we heard you were looking for a place in Springfield.
Yeah, well, it's the only town in America that'll let me fish with dynamite.
The show's creators cleverly played against his good boy image,
Homer, we're out of vodka.
and Ron was delighted to play along with the joke. Howard was on top of the world, but instead of resting, he took on a completely new challenge. In 2000, he directed the epic live-action fantasy Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Based on the TV cartoon and children's book, the film starred an unrecognizable Jim Carrey as the Scrooge-like furry green anti-hero. Audiences flocked to see the quirky Christmas tale, and the box office soared to over $260 million. Howard then changed course again with a daring choice, A Beautiful Mind, starring Jennifer Connelly and Academy Award winner Russell Crowe.
I got myself into something I think I might need some help.
The film was based on the true story of mathematician John Forbes Nash Jr.
What distinguishes you is that you are the best natural code breaker I have ever seen.
And his struggle to overcome schizophrenia. Howard inventively captured the chaotic mind of Nash as the mathematician conquered the boundaries between fact and fiction, eventually winning the Nobel Prize. When A Beautiful Mind opened, some critics objected to liberties taken with the facts of Nash's life. They accused the filmmakers of sanitizing personal events in the volatile genius's story. Howard defended his creative choices, stressing that his movie was inspired by the life of the mathematician and not an historical account. Despite mixed reviews, audiences embraced the film, and steady word of mouth turned A Beautiful Mind into a box office smash. The film went on to earn 8 Academy Award nominations. And in March 2002, one of Ron's greatest dreams came true when he received his first Oscar for Best Director.
I'm grateful that I was raised by an extraordinary man, my father, Rance Howard, and my late mother, Jean Howard. I also want to mention that before my mom passed away about 18 months ago, she predicted that this was going to happen for me on this film. Well, she also made that prediction on every movie that I've directed since 1983. So now you know a little bit something about my mom. Academy, thank you so much.
For 2 decades, America watched as Ron Howard grew from a sweet-faced boy to a clean-cut young man. Today, the Oscar-winning director continues to delight audiences with films that reflect the value of family, friendship, and community, the standards by which he lives his life.
He is the same person now, only he's older and wiser than he was when he was a little boy. Just a very good human person who will always do the best he can.
Ultimately, his legacy will be that he's a very warm human director who had a good sense of humor.
I really admire Ron. I admire him as a filmmaker. I admire him as a human being.
I know that he has this whole wholesome image, but he's a little bit like that. He is sort of milk and cookies.
Ron Howard returned to television in 2003 as executive producer of the award-winning comedy series Arrested Development. In the summer of 2005, Cinderella Man, a story about a Depression-era boxer's rise to fame, took critics and the box office by storm. The release of Howard's film adaptation of The Da Vinci Code starring Tom Hanks was yet another breakaway hit, grossing over $217 million in domestic box office sales by August 2006. Both Hanks and Howard reprised their roles in the Da Vinci Code prequel, Angels and Demons, released in May 2009. Prior to that, Howard returned to the director's chair for the political drama Frost-Nixon, which was released in December 2008. The film was a success, earning 5 Oscar nominations, including Best Director. Whether it's playing the all-American boy next door or directing a great human drama, audiences continue to knock on Ron Howard's door, asking for more.